How is everybody today? Awesome. Happy November. I guess headed towards happy Thanksgiving time, so it's always a good time of the year to fellowship with one another. My name is Gail Carr-Williams, and I'm the Assistant Director of Community, Neighborhood, and Government Relations at Vanderbilt University in the Division of Public Affairs. And on behalf of Vanderbilt University, I want to welcome you to our inaugural Food for Thought, a community lunchtime event. So we're pretty excited about this, mainly because I think that we've engaged with an amazing partner for our first three Food for Thoughts this year, the Frist Center, which is all of you are in this absolutely amazing, historical, beautiful building that we are so fortunate here in Nashville to have as part of our community. Wouldn't you say? Woo-woo! Which is a great thing. And again, working with me on this is Chandra. You all know Chandra, who so wonderfully takes all of your reservations, has your name tags, orders the lunches, and does it with just the calmness and the coolness that we all wish that we had. But so thanks to Chandra, and what a joy to work with her again. And also assisting us is Carol Mackey from our office. And Carol just comes in and she keeps us straight and keeps everyone going, and she puts name tags in a nice orderly fashion. They used to let me do them, but they were upside down, sideways, and around. So they don't let me near them at all. So, but I'm grateful for both of them and appreciative that they would be partners in this. So a couple of housekeeping things before I introduce this absolutely amazing panel that we have today. If you parked in the Frist parking lot, Chandra has outside parking passes, I guess you call it, for $3 parking. So you might see her if you don't have one. And also available today, the Frist Center has graciously offered all of you an opportunity to view the exhibits. And Chandra also has tags for you to do that. Now, while the Frist has graciously allowed that, I want you to also think about a membership of Frist if you don't already have one. I think once you see the exhibit and see their grace today, that you just are gonna run right back in and get the membership anyhow, right? If you don't have one. So thank you very much, Frist, for doing that. And also I wanna thank Megan, who is here at the Frist, a curator, sort of new to Nashville too. So maybe we can give her a warm welcome. She's been amazing at helping us put this together. So. And Ann Henderson is in the back, and she's been an amazing partner as we do this too. So since this is our first one, I wanted to make certain I gave thank yous to so many people, and I'm certain I'm missing somebody. But again, just so grateful for the partnership with Frist today. So I think I did all of the housekeeping. Now on to why we all came is this absolutely great panel to discuss amazing art that's here at the Frist. And first, I'd like to introduce Professor Dennis Dickerson. And Dennis is the James M. Lawson Professor of History at Vanderbilt University. He specializes in American labor history, the history of U.S. civil rights movement, and African American religious history. He has a current book project which includes Brother in the Spirit of Gandhi, William Stewart Nelson, and the Religious Origins of the Civil Rights Movement. He also has a short history of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which will be with the Cambridge University Press. Before coming to Vanderbilt, Professor Dickerson taught at Williams College from 1976 to 1999 and was the Stanfield Professor of History, chairman of the Department of History, and chairman of the Afro-American Studies program. He's also taught right up the road a bit at Rhodes College, also Yale Divinity School, and Payne Theological Seminary. Woo, you've been awfully busy. Professor Dickerson. Thank you so much for being here today. Also on our panel is an iconic woman here in Nashville, Betty Nixon. Many of you know Betty, and Betty was previously my boss. And she welcomed me with very open arms to Nashville and allowed me an opportunity to become a part of this community in very meaningful ways, and I'm always grateful for that mentorship and also grateful for that friendship. You know, Betty's had a long career in politics, government, community, and civic activism. In all of her endeavors, she championed the rights and opportunities for minorities and women, and she's credited with leading the way for neighborhood organizations and grassroots governance in Nashville. As I mentioned, Betty retired from Vanderbilt University in 2007, and while she was there, she was responsible for public policy advocacy and led the development of broad coalitions between Vanderbilt and the community. Also, Betty served on the Metro Council, which many of you might know or might not know, from 1975 to 87. And she was the first woman to chair the Finance Committee. Betty is also a Nashville YWCA Women of Achievement awardee and also a recipient of the Athena Award. Betty's amazing, and I'm really looking forward to her sharing her stories about Nashville for this. And Dr. Susan Edwards. Dr. Susan Edwards is the director of this absolutely amazing place that we sit here in. And Susan, as executive director and CEO of the Frist Center for the Visual Arts, has been able to bring some fabulous exhibits to Nashville. We are very fortunate to have her vision, her leadership, and her expertise in this city. Some of these exhibits range from the International Gem, The Birth of Impressionism, also William Eggleston, and the Carrie Mae Weems 3 Decades of Photography and Video, which, after being here at the Frist, is touring nationally until 2014. Dr. Edwards comes from the University of South Carolina and then received her PhD from the City University of New York. You know, she's an expert in American art and photography, and as you well know, she's organized exhibits and so many other things. You know, she sits on museums and councils of art boards from France to Italy to the United States, while also serving various universities across the university, to mention University of South Carolina and Harvard. Susan is indeed a jewel, and we are very fortunate here in Nashville. Dr. Susan Edwards. To my friend, Dr. Outlaw, and to my children, Uncle Lou. Dr. Outlaw, just as Betty, was one of the first people here in Nashville to welcome our family to Nashville, and deeply appreciative for his friendship and his kindness. And when we decided to do this, he was the first person I called and said, can you help me sort of think through this, how we might want to organize thoughts about lectures about this absolutely wonderful exhibit and how we can share this with the Nashville community. And Dr. Outlaw says, sure, what do you want me to do? And you'll see what he is able to do as he moderates this absolutely great panel. Lou is professor of philosophy at Vanderbilt University, a graduate of Fisk University, and has his PhD from Boston University. His teaching areas and scholarly interests include racial matters and socio-political life in the United States in particular, and in legacies and practices of European and Euro-American philosophy, social and political philosophy, Africana philosophy, and American philosophy. Lou was a previous professor for our OSHA Lifelong Learning Program last year, which was just a great hit, and I think we are fortunate to have Dr. Outlaw here today to moderate our panel and to present this wonderful opportunity for us at lunchtime. Well, those are some big introductions. And we usually don't spend that much time on introductions, but today I think it was really worth it because I think that it helps with the context of what their conversation will be today. So I appreciate you all hearing about the wonderments of all four of these great people. And at this point, I am going to turn it over to the panel and Professor Outlaw's leadership. And thanks again for all of you being here today and joining us for our new Lunchbox series. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lady Gail. Good afternoon. Oh, most of you must be Baptist, huh? That's a nice response. Thank you very much for joining us for Food for Thought at the Frisch Center for the Visual Arts. Susan, thank you for having us in and for bringing on this particularly interesting combination of exhibitions. I'm the first impediment between you and these wonderful people on the stage, so I'm going to minimize my presence right now by turning to Susan, who's going to talk to us a bit about these exhibitions, descriptions of them. You'll see some of the slides as she's talking from the exhibition. She'll give you an account of why they are here, and then I'll come back and offer a bit of framing considerations or tidbits of food for thought as we then move into presentations by Betty and by Dennis, and then we'll open it up for discussions. We want to hear from you all too. We hope that this will be a really provocative and civil discussion. Susan?
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be on this panel with these very esteemed speakers, but also special thanks to Gail Williams. She did not mention she's a member of the Board of Trustees at the Frisch Center, and she does an amazing job and connects us with the community, which is extremely important to us. I was asked to say why these shows now and why we selected these to be together. And it was very deliberate, giving us an opportunity to have a great conversation. Exhibitions here are selected based on their ability to help our visitors see their world in new ways. And we want them to be very thought-provoking. And art can be beautiful, provocative, challenging, but we hope always worth your time. And our goal is to bring the art of the world, whether it's international, national, regional, or community. But we also keep in mind that this is also a family-focused organization. Everyone under the age of 18 is always free at the Frisch Center, so they will have the exposure to the art of the world and the lessons that we can learn from it. 30 Americans, which presents art made by 31 African Americans over the last 30 years, is really not a one-off by any means. The Frisch Center has presented the work of many African Americans, and including some very important monographic exhibitions, including Aaron Douglas, who was a professor at Fisk University for decades. We also presented the work of Thornton Dial, Bill Traylor, the Gee's Ben quilt exhibition, and of course Carrie Mae Weems last year, among many other African-American artists who have been part of group exhibitions. This allowed us very much to enter a conversation. The choice of having Norman Rockwell, American Chronicles, upstairs gave us the opportunity to really reflect upon what these exhibitions had in common. Norman Rockwell, one of the most beloved and well-known illustrators of the 20th century, was predominantly associated with a kind of idealized, dominant culture vision of society, very sanitized in many ways, and probably not close to reality even in the moments that he was making it, or even in the minds of many people. But it's something that, in retrospect, we go back and look at when he was under some strictures about what he could illustrate, and then those works of art that he created when he was working more independently, which tended to lean towards less popular themes, but certainly more germane and politically relevant. This opened up this crossover of audiences for these two exhibitions, and we hoped to create an interesting dialogue and something that we wanted to foster in our community. And if you have the opportunity to either get from the library or buy a copy of the 30 Americans exhibition catalog, there are amazing essays in there. But I think really the essay by Michelle Wallace is one that kind of leads me personally into the value of conversation. Michelle Wallace was organizing a very important conversation of Black about black popular culture in the early 1990s, 1991, at the Dia Center in New York City. And there they were really talking about already at that point where we were with a conversation about African American experience particularly, but also how this was being perhaps to some extent diluted by the focus on diversity issues and ethnicity, and how it was getting spread out among many different communities. But also in her essay, she mentioned something that's extremely important for us to think about, which is a formative book from the early 1971 by Linda Nochlin, Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists? And Professor Naughlin's position is, if you think about that, I mean, we're still thinking about it in the 21st century, but in the early 70s, it was very evident that women haven't been given access. And Nochlin famously said, nor have African Americans, and let's think about this. What can we do to remedy the positions in art schools, access, collecting, gallery representation, and museum representation? Now, interestingly, what we'll be talking about today is this period 1954 to 1964, from Brown versus the Board of Education to the Civil Rights, passing of the Civil Rights Act. And many of the artists in 30 Americans were not even born until the 60s and 70s. So they really become the generation that follows Norman Rockwell's lead in. So while 30 Americans opened first, Rockwell kind of leads us into this sort of cultural change. There were many artists working, African American artists working before this generation who are currently represented, and these artists truly stand on the shoulders of artists like Robert Colescott, who is part of this, but also Sam Gilliam, Howardina Pindell, Melvin Edwards, who produced some of the most poignant abstract sculpture, which were called the Lynch fragments, which his goal was to create something beautiful out of something so ugly that would give us opportunity for conversations like the ones we're having today. Raymond Saunders, Betty Sayre, Alma Thomas, and many others. In 30 Americans, there has been the issue of, are we in a post-black generation? Well, I would say not if you experience the world through darker skin. And I think the whole issue of visual culture is so extremely important because we use just what we see to judge people, to stereotype people, to look at them and put them in a category. So learning to read our visual images is extremely important. And another area where these exhibitions overlap, and I think is another point of departure, is in the area that has to do with advertising, because both Norman Rockwell and many of the artists who are working in the 30 Americans, Hank Willis, Thomas in particular, are dealing with critiques of advertising and how in advertising, we sort of set up our own notions of desire and our political visual images. So those are sort of some brief introductory thoughts of my own. We're really looking forward to filling in some of the gaps here and then having further conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Artists create out of their imaginations, thus out of their experiences. What are the shaping of the experiences of artists within these United States of America? So let's, for a couple of tidbits of thought, let's go back a bit. The lie that is too often and still told is that the United States of America was founded for the freedom of all without regard to race, creed, color, sex, national origin, gender. Though we're not likely even today to get through the House of Representatives a bill to prohibit invidious discrimination against people because of their sexual orientation and identity. But the lie is that this nation was founded for freedom for all. It was not. The United States was founded as a white nation state. Tidbit for thought. Within the context of that founding, then, virtually all who were in this country had to have their senses of themselves and of others shaped by racial considerations. Whether you could be a citizen depended upon whether you were white or not, whether you were male, whether you owned property, or whether you were a veteran. Not white, not male, not a property owner, not a veteran, you're not a citizen. For more than 2/3 of the history of this country, most adults were not and could not be citizens of the United States of America. For more than 2/3 of the history of this country. To come to identify oneself and others required that one use, first and foremost, racial categories. This also determined whether or not you could understand yourself and understand others as being, in fact, full human beings. Only people identified as white could be regarded as full human beings for more than 2/3 of the history of this country. Now, that behooves us to take a very close look at the work of artists. Out of what are they creating their art? And to what ends is the art of their creation being directed? What roles will the art play in what context? For example, Susan mentioned advertising, or for those of us who grew up with Life and Look magazines and the Saturday Evening Post, what was the work of those covers where Norman Rockwell's work was featured? To put it differently, who could be an American? Who could be imagined as an American? Why is this still a contested issue today, even for a sitting president of the United States? What is it about this notion of being an American? And by the way, let us notice when we say Americans, we don't even bother to distinguish that we're talking about North America, not Central, not Southern, not even Canada. We can disregard all of the other Americas and just say American and understand that we're only referring to the United States as though no other Americas matter. What is going on in the imagination of artists then who create art out of this historical cauldron? And particularly when we get to the 1950s, in this city especially, where we have a movement not just for civil rights, but for recognition as full human beings, along with respect for our human dignity, and thus for our freedom. Let us remember that this is a city, our city, in which this movement has a particularly historic location and sets of developments. And finally, let me remind you, on September 11th in 2001, 4 commercial airliners were hijacked. 3 were flown into buildings, 1 into a field in Pennsylvania. Over the course of that day, with the destruction of the World Trade Center, over 3,000 people lost their lives. In response, the United States of America literally declared war, went to war, first in Afghanistan, next in Iraq. What I think a majority of Americans, possibly many in this room, regarded as a justified war, an unprovoked attack that killed thousands of innocent citizens. Now, what I want you to do is to compare our national response to one day's action and the deaths that occurred by thinking about what happened to millions of people over the course of nearly 300 years. How many African peoples and their descendants died in over 300 years of dehumanizing enslavement and oppression? And yet, to this day, there has been no organized response directed at white people by people of African descent that even begins to approximate the response of this nation state to one day's activities and 3,000 deaths. How do you account for the difference? I would offer that the response of the freedom civil rights movement, in contrast to the activities of Al-Qaeda, is an extraordinary gift to the United States. That it behooves us then to look, for example, at the art, the imaginations of a lot of artists of African descent and try and understand what is it that they are offering us? And how does that compare, say, to Norman Rockwell? Just a few tidbits of food for thought. My good friend, Professor Brother Reverend Dennis Dickerson, will take us further down this road about art and movements. Dennis?
Thank you, Lou. The question can be posed on, can art cause or facilitate change? Can art change consciousness? Can art both instruct and inspire? My answer to all of those questions is yes, and permit me to be a bit autobiographical. I grew up near Pittsburgh a long time ago, and I can think of at least three bits of art, 3 examples of art that had an indelible imprint on the kind of person that I've become. I remember as a child, we all in the 50s subscribed to Jet magazine. If it was in Jet, it was true. And I recall in the mid-50s seeing, I'd never heard of the Emmett Till case prior to seeing his butchered face in Jet. And I was a kid, about 5 or 6 years old. And I remember, I can remember as though it was yesterday, seeing that butchered, disfigured, contorted face. And I couldn't go to my room at night to bed unless my mother sat by the bed until I went to sleep. I was just so frightened as a child. I couldn't make any sense of that photograph, that genre of art had an incredible impact on me that lasts to this day. Art is not something to be taken lightly. I remember also during the 50s, the debut of the film Imitation of Life with Lana Turner with top billing. There was an appearance by Mahalia Jackson, and it was about the peculiar cross-section of racial identity as well as racial invisibility. I was struck by the fact that although Annie, the maid to Lana Turner, Miss Lola, had been together many, many years, that Miss Lola never knew anything about Annie's private life. Didn't know that she belonged to a church and several lodges and various other social organizations. That close, that intimate, and yet invisible. I remember that film. And I also remember in the high school that I attended in a largely white town, about 12 miles from Pittsburgh, my mother was a member and at various times president and treasurer and so forth of the Phyllis Wheatley Literary Society, a group of black women who raised money every year for black kids who finished Duquesne High School, who were going on to college. And in the 40s, before my birth, my mother's group had given to the high school this huge portrait of George Washington Carver in his garb as a chemist. And every one of us who went to Duquesne High School, white and black, as we passed through the hallways to go to class, had to see George Washington Carver. Beautiful portrait. And I remember the indelible imprint that had. Here was a black man who was an agricultural chemist standing before black and white kids in a town where the only position that black men had was either a custodian at the bank or post office or a steel worker, which is what my father was. These are just three examples. I'm sure you can think of some in your own autobiography where art had an important impact upon your consciousness and even had the potential to facilitate, as far as your own life trajectory was concerned, your participation, your posture toward social change. And we come to Norman Rockwell and his feeble attempt to portray African-American life and African-American consciousness. And I'm struck by some core sentiments that one can see in some of his covers for the Saturday Evening Post. One can see in his art calm and courage and conviction. With the young girl, the problem we all live with, and it's peculiar that she's defined. Here's a pretty young girl, pretty brand new dress, no name assigned to her, though we know who she is. But her name, her title is Problem. She's a problem. But there's a remarkable peace. I mean, this young lady, she's at peace with her. She knows where she's going, and she's okay with it. She's picking up her step, though protected she is sure and certain in the path that she's undertaken. One sees a similar kind of calm and courage and conviction with the new kids in the neighborhood, their courage in confronting their new neighbors, all suggesting, and perhaps I'm reading this into it, the possibility of reconciliation, the possibility of friendship. Now, this is a lighter side. These two portrayals are the lighter side of the civil rights struggle. There's no Emmett Till there. There's no butchered face here. You don't see violence there. But not so in some of the other portrayals, particularly Rockwell's murder in Mississippi and Gary Simmons's Duck, and Noose. And there, and this is interesting for discussion, one sees black people portrayed in vulnerability and victimization. And that's something we may want to talk about. And lastly, we can see this as a source of the assertiveness that we see displayed in the civil rights movement. It's that victimization, that vulnerability to which activists are responding. And I would suggest that more art is needed in this genre, particularly here in Nashville, where black and white youth overcame fear and were determined to take their destiny in their hand. Good to see, it would be good to see a portrait of Mayor Ben West being morally tortured by that fateful question that Diane Nash poses to him. Seeing the stubborn students in the downtown lunch counter sit-ins and boarding those buses for the Freedom Rides. There's a lot that still can be done and perhaps should be done, and some hopefully are inspired to do greater art in this field of civil rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Yeah. One of the things that I had to learn from my parents and grandparents growing up in Starkville, Mississippi, that for all of the disturbing aspects about racial segregation, I was not allowed to grow up thinking that all white people were the same, because they weren't. Not all white people bought the lies about white supremacy and lived them out in the same way. Some did it more openly and more courageously than others. Some did it surreptitiously, but they did it in ways that would make a difference in how segregation was practiced. Created spaces, helped shape relationships that made a difference. But it was particularly important, my parents made me understand, and my grandparents, to know who were those white people who were different, who were what they call the good white people. And of course, one of the questions is, how does a person identified as white get through all of that socialization into the madness of white supremacy to become someone different, though white? We can learn some of that from Betty Nixon. Betty?
Thank you. It's an honor to be a part of this panel. Rockwell's work in the 1960s, I think, took advantage of his popularity with the majority culture in order to raise his voice against the injustice of racism and segregation. And maybe, although I agree with Professor Dickinson's comments, maybe because he did have such great credibility with the white culture, he was able to address or to convince some folks who might not have been persuaded by more confrontational advocates. And you see that, we saw that in the Murder in Mississippi and the other pictures that he showed. But leave that up there, Lou, because what I came to understand from looking at the exhibit is that for the preceding 40 years, people of color were virtually absent from Rockwell's work, except for a few stereotypical paintings like the one of the little boy and the waiter. The ones we see, now that he was the illustrator for Boy Scouts, for the Boy's Life, which was the magazine of Boy Scouts, and the Boy Scouts of America was a completely white organization. So his work reflected that. The body of work depicted an idealized white America. Warm family life, compassion, patriotism. The work reflected how white Americans wanted to see ourselves. And it reflected the perspective and values of the magazines for which he worked and for its readers. I lived that America. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, in this very society, in the world of what I call Betty Grable, Betty Boops, and Betty Crocker. And in the 1940s and 50s, people of color were absent from the white consciousness. They were absent from Nashville's white neighborhoods, from Nashville's white schools, white businesses, white restaurants like the one that my family owned, white churches, white medicine, white law, white clubs, white swimming pools, white parks. Negroes were pictured, not pictured, in local newspapers, in either the news section or the society section. The only people of color in full view of Nashville's white society were maids, chauffeurs, waiters, cooks, gardeners, laborers. I remember vividly the exact day and time that I became aware of the injustice of segregation. I was 11, and the year was 1947. I was on the playground at Palmer School, which was an all-white elementary school in Belmead. One of my playmates explained to me that Willie Cright, who was the Negro maid who worked for my family 5 days a week, was not going to heaven. And the reason that she was not going to heaven was that she was colored, and that people who were colored were not really people, and only people went to heaven. Well, I loved Willie Cright, and I was absolutely horrified. So I went to my church, West End Methodist, and demanded an explanation. Thankfully, my church rejected that racist doctrine, and I was told that we believed that all humans were God's children. Now, we didn't have any black humans in our church, but we at that point at least had the right approach. And that event was the beginning of my personal journey to freedom, as I call it. The journey took some time. As a Nashville youth and teen, I wasn't prepared to speak up much outside the church because I wasn't prepared to deal with the consequences. But as I matured, I was able to move from belief to action. In college at Southern Methodist University, a segregated university except for the theology school, I learned to state my convictions openly without fear of my critics. As a teacher in Alabama in early 1960, not a few of my parents were members of the Klan, and I learned to stand up to racism. I learned to talk to my father, whom I adored, about desegregating his restaurant in downtown Nashville. Cross Keys was an early target of the sit-ins. I might add that that segregated restaurant provided me with a privileged life and a good education. My first husband, John Nixon, also a Nashvilleian, was an attorney with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division 64 to 69. So we were greatly involved in the movement. What I learned from all these experiences was that if you are clear about what you believe, people pretty much leave you alone. They don't mess with you. It's the folks who try to please everybody that get caught in the crossfire. I think it's important for all of us to understand that white Americans profited from this culture of racism, slavery, and segregation. We became, by definition, more competitive in the areas of economics, of education. And so that's a part of who we are, regardless of what we did personally. Ironically, at the time that Nashville's white community could see only itself, like looking in a mirror, there was a bustling African-American middle class here. Fisk, Meharry, Tennessee State was training accountants, bankers, teachers, preachers, administrators, doctors, and very important for this conversation, musicians, painters, poets, and writers, many of whom rose to national prominence. In significant ways, the black artists from that period in Nashville are the forerunners of the extraordinary 30 Americans in this exhibit. Let me just, I'd like to end, if we can say, the slide with America. Condoleezza Rice is quoted as saying, African Americans love America more than America loves African Americans. Although we have made great progress in Nashville, I fear that we might say the same thing for Nashville, and it is my hope that someday that will not be true in Nashville or in America. And when I look at myself as a white person, I will ask, if I were a Nashvilleian of color, would I love Nashville? Why would I love America? I think art like that we have in the exhibit helps us to begin to address that question. And let me just end by saying that I'm not the only white Southerner to travel this road. Many have in their own ways. And I hope that what we learned will be useful as we address the issues in the future.
Thank you, Betty. I trust that you're dining well, having come to the Frist Center for the Visual Arts for this session today. Now it is time for you to share some of your thoughts with us, having, I hope, been sufficiently provoked, particularly in and around the struggle that continues over what is the meaning of, quote, America. What does it mean to be, quote unquote, an American of the United States as we head into the 21st century, as this country is undergoing a transformation of the kind that, if the founders knew, would probably go into hyperbolic shock. That we are on the threshold of a situation that the founders never intended. That demographically, white people in the United States are going to become part of just the rest of the population, will no longer be the dominant members of the United States of America. What will that do for our identities? How will we relate to one another? We'd like to hear from you now, please. A hand all the way in the back. There will be microphones coming your way. Please try and keep to brief comments, but preferably a question, if you please. Being a teacher, I will intervene if I think I must.
Dr. Outlaw, my name is Gregory Taylor, and this question is coming from a friend of yours, which I got this information confirmed, Dr. W.B. Billups from your hometown.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Last week, I heard that Dr. William Home Borders of the Wheat Street Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, said that the civil rights movement was never, ever supposed to leave from within the walls of the black church.
Was never supposed to be from within the walls of the black church?
It never was It never was supposed to have left from within the walls of the black
Oh.
church, and Dr. Billups, your friend, confirmed that for me just yesterday.
Well, you know, movements have a way of becoming something other than those who take themselves to be the leaders of movements, or how they can contain them. I mean, this was a movement that had to do with people, not just with preachers and heads of churches. But I'll defer to this to my good friend who's a scholar of this, Brother Dickerson. Dennis, comments? I have one foot in hell and the other on the banana peel, so I can't do much church talk.
Movements have their own contagion. When you articulate an ideal, it's hard to keep it contained within the venue out of which it sprung. Ask Thomas Jefferson when he said all persons, all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator. He had in mind white men. Persons who were not white men read themselves into those words, and it became a clarion call for persons that he never intended to articulate and cite what he had said. And so it is with any kind of social movement. Any persons who are deprived of those ideals and those aspirations take heart, not of the person who uttered the words, but in the words and the concepts themselves.
This question is directed to Frist.
Would you stand, please?
My name is David Philippi. I'm very active on death row at Riverbend Maximum Security Prison, and there is a robust art community there. That art was shown briefly at Surratt and was well received. I believe in the transformative power of art, film, and other forms of art in transforming culture for social justice. So the question is to Frist, is there anything to prevent death row art to be shown in the community gallery?
Not that I know of.
Lady Susan is more than open. I've known that she is a boundary pusher in all kinds of ways here. Please, questions, comments. The lady here in the center, microphone is on its way to you. Now, y'all answered me early on like a bunch of good Baptists. Now, y'all don't be so reticent right now. Now, come on. Please.
That was my outburst, that you are sober. So very sobering was your presentation. But Miss Betty, I went to the 50th anniversary March on Washington. In fact, I ended up on the very front row of the march on Saturday. And your discussion of how white Nashville had no consciousness at all of there being a black Nashville is mindful of what's taking place in this country. While we have the Congress who would shut the country down, and the march has not stopped, because every Saturday, some group in America is marching on Washington. I'm interested in your perspective of what you were saying about Nashville and how that affects America at large.
Thank you.
We have to engage authentically, not just, you know, because there's a workplace law or a school law. A story, if I talk about Willie Cripe, the woman who worked for my family, it was years before I realized when she went back home to Franklin, she was Mrs. Cripe. She was not Willie. She was Mrs. Cripe, and she was a pillar of her community, and she owned her own house, and she, you know, but in my days as a child, we had no understanding of the rich life of the African American community in Nashville. And I think, maybe to your point, we still don't get it. And how do we get it? Well, I think it's going to be through relationships. We have to build them one at a time, and also through institutions. There is a quote from one of the artists in the exhibit who said they asked him if black art impacted the art scene, and he said no. And he said the reason for no was that really as the legacy of slavery, that the black culture was overwhelmed by powerful white institutions. So I think we have an institutional work to do, and we have personal work to do. I don't know if that helps or not.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I find is, John, is that I find the older I get, and spending the last 30-odd years of my career at predominantly white institutions, you know, when I think back on growing up in Mississippi, I am less angry about some of the things that happen to colored people, and I'm extraordinarily infuriated by what was done year after year, day after day, to every white child born. Because every one of them had to be trained to become and to remain a racist. Every one of them. Every newborn white child had to be trained to become and to remain a racist. Every one of them. And then moreover, you take institutions, the institutions worked very, very hard to ensure that white people were virtually totally ignorant about people of African descent, even institutions of higher education. They made sure you knew nothing about black folk other than what place we were supposed to be in and how to remain and keep us in our place and how not to get polluted by undue contact with black people. But the ignorance that was promoted in white people has been utterly astounding. Ignorance of the highest certification. Still in my discipline of philosophy, even at Vanderbilt, you can get a PhD in philosophy and never ever have to read a text written by a person of color and be sent off to teach in schools increasingly populated by people of color.
The last comment reminded me of Howard Thurman, and we celebrate his birthday in November, and I wondered, I think too few people know the art of his philosophical quotes as a minister and as one who promoted multicultural worship experiences. So I don't know if you want to address that. And he was here in Nashville once. Howard Thurman.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
I want to speak of that. Too few know.
Woo, you want to take that one first, brother? I mean, I had to hear Howard Thurman when I was a first-year student at Fisk. It was one of the most memorable experiences of sitting in chapel as a first-year student, was hearing Howard Thurman. Dennis, thoughts?
Well, if anyone who studies the civil rights movement would have to attribute its origin and its success largely to Howard Thurman, mainly through his sermons and writings widely disseminated on both sides of the Atlantic. He laid a theological and philosophical foundation that shaped the ideas, tactics, as well as the vocabulary of a number of civil rights activists, both religious and secular. That's about all that can be said in this short amount of time about a man so profound.
Yeah. And for me, one of the questions is, how does such a person come about? In some ways, he's inexplicable. There should be no Howard Thurmans in the United States of America. You know, my wife and my mother-in-law went with friends on Saturday to see 12 Years a Slave. And she was pretty disturbed when she came back, you know, and she was just talking about the way in which religion was being fostered upon enslaved African people. And I said, yeah, but the slaves had their own notion of how to deal with the Word of God. And that's what I'm saying. At some level, Howard Thurman should be inexplicable. There should not be a Howard Thurman. But there was a Howard Thurman. how was there a Howard Thurman? Why was there a Howard Thurman? Why was Howard Thurman not an early instance of Osama bin Laden? That's one of the things I think we have to get our minds around. Why was there no Al-Qaeda equivalent in the United States of America? Why not? Why not? As you look at these images of 30 Americans who are contesting what it means to become identified as American, why is there nothing equivalent to Al-Qaeda? Why could Betty and her family eat a meal prepared by Willie without worrying that they were going to be poisoned to death? She certainly could have done it. Why didn't she? Why didn't she?
I want to thank everyone. I know we're going to wrap up quickly, but I just wanted to say that the importance of the transformative experience of art is that it is the springboard for more conversations. And back to the question about our future and what is Nashville leading, I think we all can appreciate the fact that Nashville's national and international profile has really attracted a lot of attention. We're the IT city. We can lead by example. And we have an international corridor out on Nolensville Road, and I think we can piggyback on our heritage of Diane Neighbor, and think about what can we do to continue the conversation and make the world a more welcoming place, a place where we're more engaged with people. We were talking when we were organizing this about the sort of false concept of America as a melting pot, and then in the 1980s we said, no, it's a salad, and Lou said, what's the metaphor for now? And I think that this is a chance for leadership, and you cared enough to be here today, and so we hope you will come back and use these wonderful works of art as an opportunity to really think seriously about these issues and not just let this be a 1 hour out of your week, but perhaps something that's a bigger commitment.
Would you join me, please, in first thanking Susan and all of the people at the Frist Center for the Visual Art, at our Frist Center for the Visual Arts, for hosting us in these two exhibitions. To Lady Betty, thank you. My colleague, Dennis Dixon, thank you. And especially to my good friend and co-director of my life, Gail Williams, and her staff at Vanderbilt. Thank you very much. And finally, a round of applause to all of you for joining us for this Food for Thought. Thank you for coming.